Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Movements video. I am Matthew, joined of course by my wonderful co-host and best friend.
Callum.
Hey man, lovely to see you. So on today's video, we have our second in our four-part report series. Last week it was my go, and this week it is Callum. So I'm really excited for this. I'm not sure. I'm actually not too sure what this one is. So I'm looking
Mhm.
forward to hearing what Callum's got to say. So yeah. Any opening sort of non-spoiler thoughts of what it could be? Of course, we've got obviously the question that leads into it, but
Mm,
yeah, what were you
yeah.
thinking?
Well, this series was I think it was my suggestion, was it?
It was a really good
Yeah,
suggestion.
and yeah, I still find myself ridden with anxiety.
Oh,
I haven't really done anything like this. I don't think this episode is going to be as interactive as yours, although it may be briefer. I think. I'll be asking a question at the start, to get us onto the topic, and then a question at the end about sort of preferences related to movies, because I thought movie mates, do
lovely.
do do a little movie topic.
Absolutely,
So I'll be talking
absolutely.
about a particular movie trope that I'm sure we'll get onto in just a minute. Matthew has unfortunately guessed what I'll be talking about today, which I'm sure won't take away from the
Not at
episode. I'm
all.
sure,
Not at
but
all.
I
I'm
but
really
I
looking
just
looking
wanted to
forward to
I just kind of wanted to surprise punch you in the face,
it. Well,
with
listen,
with content.
I'm really looking forward to this one because I don't know a lot about the topic, so yeah, I'm
Mm,
I'm actually really stoked for it. But yeah, just before we kick off today's video, thanks to everyone who supported us recently. It really does brighten up Callum and I's day when you guys leave comments and like the video and stuff. So yeah, we really do appreciate that massively. And of course, the time codes and our email is always in the description as
mm.
well. So yeah, I'm really buzzing to get into this, buddy. So are we gonna have like a question to get us into the topic, or what?
Yes.
Yes,
So
cool.
the viewers will of course know from the title of the video, and Matthew knows because he's big brain. But to get us onto the topic, and for Matthew to answer, what is arguably the most famous and distinguishable sound effect in film?
No, it
Do
has
you want
to
to
be.
pretend like you don't know? Sort of like toss some
Well,
ideas around.
I'll toss a few ideas around. I suppose I don't know. For me, I always thought like the Star Wars effect of the lightsabers was a really big
Oh yeah.
like sound effect. Of course, you've got the yeah, exactly. Of course, you've got the dinosaurs in Jurassic
Mm,
Park as well. They're pretty iconic. But I'm guessing, buddy, if you're gonna go for the biggest, the most well known, the
mm.
most interesting, the Wilhelm scream. Is that what it is?
It is of course the Wilhelm
Lovely.
Scream, and yes, you have brought up a few examples of very famous sound effects, but those are localized to one movie or one franchise.
Sure.
The Wilhelm Scream, it goes with everything,
It does. It goes with
as
absolutely
you'll
everything,
hear.
doesn't it? I love
So
it.
of course, the logical first question to ask is, what is the Wilhelm Scream? So the Wilhelm Scream is a stock sound effect that has been used in both the biggest blockbusters and the lowest budget movies and television shows over 60 years. It is usually heard when someone on screen is shot or falls from a great height, and is considered the holy grail of movie geek sound effects, having turned into the best movie in joke ever by its revival in the 1970s. The sound effect was first used in the 1951 Raoul Walsh directed western Distant Drums, heard in a scene in which a group of soldiers wade through a swamp, and one of them lets out a piercing scream as an alligator drags him underwater.
Oh wow.
As is common in sound recording in the film industry, the scream was recorded later in a sound booth, with the simple direction to make it sound like a man getting bit by an alligator. Apt, I guess. Uh, and he
So
screams,
specific. I love it.
and the character screams. The performer, who was responsible for the Wilhelm scream, let out six screams in one take, with the fifth of those six becoming the iconic Wilhelm, and the others used as additional screams in other parts of the movie. Since 1951, the iconic sound has been featured in over 400 movies and TV series, alongside a certain recording. I don't know if I've written that correctly, but uh, I'll commit to it. It says,
Go for it.
alongside a certain recording of the cry of the red-tailed hawk, the universal telephone ring, and Castle Thunder, it is probably the most well-known cinematic sound cliche. So those are examples of a few other
Yeah.
famous ones.
Hmm.
None that I'm particularly familiar with, at least how they're named there.
Yeah.
Universal telephone ringing, I imagine, is just the ring ring, the standard generic sort of
Yeah.
sound effect
Sound
there. And the
effect. Yeah.
Castle Thunder, I think that's sort of popularized by Scooby Doo. If you know a
Yes.
castle in the foreground. you know, lightning in the back, and
Perhaps.
then, or well, thunder in the back, and then you know, a
Mhm.
certain musical cue.
Yeah. It's
So
so interesting that you mentioned
following
that, buddy. Sorry. Go ahead.
apologies,
All right. It's really
uh,
interesting to mention that because whenever you sort of mention those details to me, it kind of brings to mind a few stories, you know, from that we were you mutually experienced. You know, I remember one time that you often quote as well is back when we studied an inspector calls for English, and that in
mm,
that play you had to like you had to memorize, you know, certain sound effects in that play to, you know, write down in
yeah,
essays and stuff. And it kind of reminds me of our English teacher used to just, you know, give us a very stereotypical. I mean, it was a telephone ring, wasn't it? Back in the day,
mm,
was one of the main ones in that play as well, which was funny. And also when you said about, you know, how the Wilhelm Scream was recorded after the production, it really
yeah,
reminds me of that. Have you ever seen, you know, there's a lot of videos where you see, you know, sort of action stars record their grunts and their stuff during the action scene. Have you ever seen the Hugh Jackman one for Logan as well?
yeah, yeah. I
Yeah,
have.
it's
You know
crazy.
where,
Like, yeah,
yeah, it shows him, you know, on the screen running through the forest, and him
yeah.
just being, huh, huh,
Yeah,
huh,
no, it's really funny.
huh.
Yeah, it's so funny to watch, but like he really gets into character. So that's such an interesting detail, actually. Yeah, I love it. I didn't actually think it was a real person, to be honest. I thought it was just a manufactured effect. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we'll get on to the potential identity, Matthew. But you
Oh,
know, just to add a bit of shade, and while we're talking about phones,
mhm.
recently, I don't know if you know, your family is you know, if your family is you know, in possession of a landline, you know, this is a weird
We
conversation,
are.
but
No,
you
we
know,
are. We are. Yeah, we
yeah,
are.
yeah, me too. But I feel like they've pretty much you know, been done away with. But
Yeah, it's a thing of the
you know,
past, isn't it?
I've been looking at, you know, some potential furnishings, you know, for a future home. And you know, I'm just
I love it.
considering, you know, getting like a bomb ass telephone. You know, either
Yeah,
like a
old
dial up
school.
one,
Dial
or
up. Yeah,
have you seen the ones that are like a can? They're called candlestick ones, where you have to like hang up the receiver on a hook.
yeah, yes. I've
Like,
seen those
I
ones. Oh, proper
those are
old
banging.
school. Proper old
Yeah,
school.
yeah.
I love that for sure. Absolutely.
So to get back on the topic, following its debut in 1951, the effect became a regular part of the Warner Brothers sound library and was continually used by the by the studio's filmmakers in their movies. A group of budding sound designers at USC's film school in the 1970s recognized that the unique scream kept popping up in numerous films they were watching, nicknaming it the Wilhelm Scream after a character in the first movie they all recognized it from, a 1953 western, The Charge at Feather River, in which a character named Private Wilhelm lets out a pain scream after being shot in the leg by an arrow. A member of this group of the USC sound designer students was future Academy Award winner Ben Burt, who did copious amounts of
Wow.
research to find the identity of the screamer, as it was unknown for decades. He eventually found a Warner Brothers call sheet from Distant Drums that listed actors who were assembled to record additional pickup elements after the film was completed. The most likely candidate was an actor and musician named Sheb Woodley. Sheb Woolley, I never read that out loud before,
That's a great name.
who appeared in classics like High Noon, Giant, which was also what one of James Dean's, you know, one of
Oh
his
yeah.
three credited appearances, and the TV show Rawhide, uh, and who, as a musician, sang the popular 1958 novelty song "Purple People Eater."
Well renowned. That is
Mm,
fantastic.
yeah, not one I'd heard of,
No,
admittedly,
me
but
neither.
Bert's theory has been supported by an interview in 2005 with Linda Dotson, Woolley's widow. Dotson confirmed Woolley's scream had been heard in many westerns, adding, he always used to joke about how he was so great at screaming and dying in films. Despite the usage of the sound, however, no royalties have been, or, you know, I don't know if I wrote that sentence correctly either. Despite the usage of the sound, no royalties are or have ever been paid. So
So
Woolley, you know, and his estate, his family are never ever going to see money from that because there's no concrete evidence to prove he was responsible.
so it kind of seems like the original use of the Wilhelm scream, what you were saying, is when like a cowboy gets dragged into a, you know,
Hmm.
a lake or something by an alligator. So it's interesting that so what you were saying was the actor Woolley, who had sort of, did he like claim credit for the Wilhelm scream in a sense, or what was the deal there?
Well, you know, so the theory goes, which presented by Ben Burt, that in 1951, after the completion, you know, after the production completed on, you know, that film,
Yeah.
then a couple of actors were brought in, like sort of a short list of actors were brought in to film additional dialogue and additional noises, you know, for for just the
Yeah.
the post-production,
Production. Yeah.
and just the person that he picked out as being the most likely candidate
Oh,
was
okay.
this guy.
That's so
So
interesting.
he's never claimed credit, but just years after, in his research, he's sort of come to the conclusion it must be this guy, and
Yeah.
just his widow has sort of implicitly said that he was responsible, but nothing that I could find on him actually making a claim to the fame.
That's so interesting, because one thing I
So
also didn't realize was that it's actually not named after someone. It's named after a character from a film that was quite popular at the time. Was it like Sergeant Wilhelm or something that you
yeah,
said? That's actually really interesting. I
yeah,
would have thought that would have been the name of the actual
yeah. So Sergeant
puppet.
Wilhelm.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Wow, I didn't know. Didn't know that.
Yeah, I 100% thought that. I had no idea who Wilhelm was, but I absolutely would have thought it would be the performer, not
Yes, no,
some
absolutely.
USC
That's just
students,
yeah,
attributing that name from a different film where,
yeah,
and it's not even attributed to, a character in the film where it actually appeared. Because I
yeah.
feel like,
That's so
if you
strange.
if you're gonna do that, you should probably name it after,
As you were.
mhm. So to get on to its most famous uses, without a doubt, the most iconic use of the sound effect is in Star Wars.
Yeah.
As a joke, the USC students that I talked about previously, you know, try to slip the effect into any of the student films that they were working on at the time. So after he graduated from USC, Ben Burt, who we've spoken about previously, was hired by fellow USC alum George Lucas to do the sound design in Star Wars. And as a nod to his former classmates, Burt put the scream in the movie, tracking down the original recording, which he found as a studio reel labeled "Man Being Eaten by Alligator." Again, apt. Uh, the
Absolutely.
scream is most notably used when a stormtrooper is shot by Luke Skywalker and falls into a chasm on the Death Star.
Mm.
Burt would go on to use the Wilhelm scream in various scenes in Star Wars and Indiana Jones. The beginning of an in-joke amongst some sound designers of the film industry, especially at Skywalker Sound. Tragically, however, and I mean
Oh
it,
no.
on February 22nd, 2018, sound editor Matthew Wood revealed that Lucasfilm had decided not to use the Wilhelm scream anymore following the release of Star Wars Episode 7, The Force Awakens, RIP,
That is
and instead
devastating.
replaced it, I know, and instead replaced it with a new stock sound effect in order to develop a calling card of their own. Clearly, they failed.
Yes, absolutely. Because it's weird when I think of the Wilhelm scream, bud, you think of George Lucas movies, don't you? You think
Mm,
of you think of Star Wars and things like that, and it's become iconic because of that, arguably as well. Especially with
yeah,
the stormtroopers and stuff like that. So it's funny that George Lucas and or Lucasfilm would just sort of abandon that cinematic trope. It's
yeah.
so strange.
I don't know, who, like, how they thought they could do better, but I'll sort of go and talk about why it was maybe why it's a controversial use,
Yeah,
using it is potentially a controversial decision. I'm a big fan of the Wilhelm scream, which is why I chose to talk about it today. I
of
always
course.
appreciate its use. It does not take me out of the film whatsoever. But a question that I was thinking whilst I was researching is why do filmmakers still use this sound effect?
Yeah.
Because of course I love it, but I'm sure it can be distracting. So firstly, just when it comes to cost effectiveness, reusing the same stock sound effect saves both time and money.
That's true.
Uh,
That is true, actually. Yeah.
it is an easy go-to and has become the most famous movie death scream in cinema. But more crucially, and this is sort of the concept of it being like a cult inside joke, is that crucially, directors like Peter Jackson and Quentin Tarantino, as well as countless other sound designers, sought out the sound and put it in their own movies, wanting to be inside of Bert's joke.
Mhm.
The Wilhelm scream began showing up everywhere, making it an unofficial badge of honor. So it was really
Absolutely.
just a desperate cry of like let us be
Yeah.
part of this secret club.
Yeah, no,
But
literally. Yeah.
to conclude on the history of the Wilhelm scream, it remains an iconic sound in cinema history, but some have criticized it to be distracting and disengaging for an audience, which is potentially why Lucasfilm opted not to. They maybe wanted to have a bit more prestige with their new Star Wars
Yeah.
trilogy,
Hmm.
but it just seems so dumb because
It
you know
does. Yeah.
I. I feel like that is where that series fell down, is that they pushed away fun and excitement for angst, and I think what
Completely.
they thought was quality was dreary.
Completely.
I just don't get a sense of fun from those
No,
films,
it's a real
where I do
shame.
with The Empire Strikes Back, and I think something to do with that is like the hokiness and the silliness that is sort of
completely.
epitomized by the Wilhelm Scream.
Yeah, completely, dude, for sure. Like, I think part of the charm of the original Star Wars trilogy is because they don't take themselves too seriously, and that's why I like films, that typically use the Wilhelm scream, because it's always like a subtle little nod. It says to me that the director, one, cares enough about his or her film to sort of have a grand cinematic trope like that in there. Do you know what I mean? It's a nice little subtle nod for those who are interested, and of course it's iconic in its own right. And it kind of gets me thinking as well, like, why do you think it has become so popular? Do you think because it is such a humorous noise? Like, it's gotta be, isn't it? Like, it is a really hilarious death scream. But that being said, back in the day with those sort of older films, which I'm guessing are like westerns and those kind of films, like, maybe it wasn't seen as quite a humorous, because I imagine a lot of those films
Yeah,
do take themselves quite seriously. So I'm interested to know, like, where that turning point
yeah.
was between, like, comedy and not. You know what I mean?
Well, I've watched its original use and then its most popular use, which is the first use was in 1951. The
Yeah.
second, well, not the second, but the most famous use of it was in 1953. So I watched those, and those are very serious scenes. They're scenes of sort of combat and
Hmm.
tension. So that is a moment to be taken very seriously.
Yeah.
So I imagine any times that it was used, between the period of 1951 and the early 70s, I think every time it was used, it was probably used, you know, not with the conscious self-awareness of this is a funny in joke
Yeah.
at that
Yeah.
point,
Exactly.
because it hadn't been revived by Ben Burt. By that point, it was taken very seriously. So that was just when they were lazy and they're like, oh, we don't want to bother recording, that audio. We'll just throw that in.
Hmm.
But then
Yeah.
that added to the history and the tapestry of this in joke, where whilst it not being intentional. So I think any time it's been used after its use in Star Wars, it is to be part of the in joke.
That's fascinating, because it's kind of one of those tropes where I don't want to see it, go away or fade away from cinema. Do you know? I think it's become so integral to a lot of, just for a cinematic trope in general. It's the only one I can really think of that springs to mind that, is in its own right, a trope, like we were saying. Do you know
Mm.
what I mean? Or an audio trope, at least. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, I hope it doesn't go anywhere, because I think it's really fascinating to see how it's evolved from, one of those audio clips that has, survived from, those westerns where it was a really serious scene, to now it can be used in an action film, but in quite a humorous way. Do you know what I mean? It's great to
Well,
see.
where do you think you first noticed it?
Probably Star
Like,
Wars, I would say.
when do you think your awareness came
Well,
of it?
definitely the Lego Star Wars video games. Yeah, for me,
Mm.
it's definitely definitely there. What about yourself?
It was from a CinemaSins video on everything wrong with Man of Steel, which obviously came out a fair few
Yeah.
years ago. So that video was maybe 5, 6 years old. So when I watched that, it was just it was a phrase I'd never heard of. Even when you hear it for the first time, you're like, well, I don't know what that is. But even if you hear the phrase the Wilhelm scream for the first
Yes.
time, you just don't know what to connect
You
that
don't
to.
associate it
And
with
because
anything. Yeah.
yeah,
Yes,
and because
completely.
they use a lot of language that is like, they make a lot of jokes on that channel that you don't realize are jokes, and then you look them up and you feel stupid because you've been like, tricked by them, making
Yeah.
obscure reference to something.
Yes.
To actually find out that is, its actual official name, or what it's referred to in the film industry, was a big surprise, and that gave me a
Completely.
massive appreciation for it.
For sure.
But some people don't have as big an appreciation for it. Some say it has become more popular and more redundant with its viral use in memes on the internet. But I smile every time I hear it. Do you love the
Absolutely.
Wilhelm scream as much as I do? And if so, what are some cliches or tropes that you don't appreciate?
That's a really good point. I was actually thinking sort of throughout this video, if I can't, what tropes to compare it to. I think the Wilhelm scream is definitely my favorite one. Along with, in terms of plot devices, a Chekhov's gun I can quite appreciate as well. I know
Mm,
you're a fan of that. I think one that gets really old nowadays is the trope of the MacGuffin. I think that really is, we've seen it with the
yeah,
Transformers movies, the Allspark, the Matrix, the whatever the one in the last movie was called, like the Spear of Destiny or something like that. You know what I mean? Like
it was
MacGuffins,
Merlin's staff, I think.
Merlin's staff or something. Yeah, MacGuffins. It's one of those things. one of those tropes I'm not a huge fan of anymore. You know, of course, every movie, every action movie or Marvel movie, to be honest, or most of them at least, they have MacGuffins to an extent. I mean, the Infinity Stones probably count in that as well. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I think it just depends how you use these tropes, you know. But I think the Wilhelm Scream is one of those exceptions where no matter how you use it, it's still funny, it's still iconic. Do you know what I mean?
Mm,
What about
yeah.
yourself, bud?
One that I don't appreciate is every time in Star Wars or and any film that involves combat or adversity, when the hero gets kidnapped, by this malevolent force and doesn't get killed.
Yes.
They're just left in an empty
Yeah,
cell, probably with the resources to escape.
to escape, exactly.
That's not one that I appreciate, but that's
For
obviously
sure.
on a bigger scale to the Wilhelm scream. I've referred to as a trope. It's really a cliche.
That's true.
But
That's true.
a trope is more plot based, I suppose, and one that I do appreciate. Even though it is a cop out to avoid good screenwriting. It's just it is what it is. But I love the ridiculous Deus Ex Machina.
Yeah, completely. It's so funny you mentioned that. Like in relation to Star Wars, one thing that I think everyone really finds quite humorous about those movies is the typically bad aim of the stormtroopers. You know that to always
Mm,
serve the purposes of the Skywalkers and stuff and the Resistance. I think it's always funny in those movies as well. But Deus Ex Machina is always. It's one of those terms where I actually didn't realize what the meaning of it was until a CinemaSins video, because that's always
mm,
along with the Wilhelm scream and things like that. That's what one of their sort of famous sins, I suppose.
yeah,
But yeah, it's another one. When it's
yeah.
done right over the top, it's hilarious, but also quite
It
rewarding.
translates to God of the Machine, and for anyone who
Oh
doesn't know,
well,
it's basically when the the protagonists of the film are in mortal danger, out of nowhere. An unrelated force comes in to save
yeah,
them from certain doom. So an example of that would be sort of like in Star Wars Episode 9, and this is one I don't appreciate, but in Star Wars Episode 9, when the rebellion are basically getting like their asses handed to them, and then just Lando arrives with like thousands of ships to save them. That's not
yeah,
one that I
exactly.
appreciate, because it just
Yeah,
ends in like an action orgy, which
yeah,
I
yes.
think it's the dumber the better. Like, I think if something comes out of nowhere and it makes no sense, that's the only time I appreciate
Hmm.
it truly.
Yeah, I think even it's even becoming a more of a popular thing recently, isn't it? The Ex Machina thing, especially I mean Endgame for a start. I think the Portals scene there is maybe one of the biggest up there. With the Star Wars ones as well. So it's so interesting. It's so interesting. All these cinematic tropes and cliches. I think there's definitely room there for us to discuss it, Deus Ex Machina in more detail, like maybe in a future video, like our favorite ones or least favorite ones. But yeah, just about the Wilhelm scream, it's so interesting. Like I had no idea about the origins of it completely. So yeah,
So that is my report
I thought
concluded.
that was
Uh,
fantastic. I was a blast. That was so interesting
I don't
because
I don't think I don't think the delivery was spot on, but I think the
I
content
thought
is
you did
there.
really good.
I used a fair amount of sources, so
I thought
I'm
it was
hoping
great.
I covered everything.
I thought it was great because it's one thing, I think a lot of people probably when you hear the Wilhelm scream, whenever they hear they hear the audio in movies and they maybe don't associate with the Wilhelm scream, but when you look at the history of it, when you realize, it's not actually called after someone, the identity is pretty much anonymous for the most part, unless, there is theories as to, who it could be and things like that. But yeah, I mean, it's fantastic, but I think that was a really interesting one that you just delivered there. It's evolution through cinema. So massive props. I thought that was fantastic for sure. And
And
yeah,
I'll email Matthew a link to a YouTube video compilation which features its most iconic use with with the character of Wilhelm himself. So
love it.
check that out in the description below.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll link that in the description as well, and as well, time codes and our email. But yeah, thanks so much, Callum. That was really interesting, buddy. Absolutely
Thank you.
blast. And yeah, stay tuned next week where I'll be giving my second and final report, and I'll give you a little clue. It is cinema related. It's actually a movie.
Oh,
It's actually a conspiracy theory within the cinematic enterprise. So it might involve a famous director committing some sort of act. I don't know, we'll see. It's a really interesting, I think you'll like it. It's one that's gone under the radar, but hopefully you guys really like it. So yeah, stay tuned for that. Thanks very much, Callum. I thought it was really great, really interesting. And yeah, hope you guys are all safe and well, but your family and friends are all safe and well. Take care, everyone, and bye bye.
bye bye.